It's here, and in this video we're going to be discussing the Hebrew letter Resh. So a few things about Resh to begin. Its numeration is 200. Resh is the 30th path on the tree of life, and Resh also corresponds to the Sun tarot card. So as we've been doing with our videos, we're going to be seeing this letter in a few different ways and discussing it in a few different aspects. And we're also going to be comparing it to a few other letters that are in relation to this letter. So starting off, we're going to discuss Resh as a cosmic container archetype. So let's get started. So as I just mentioned, Resh equals 200, which when reduced, it equals the number 2 as its base number. So as a container, Resh can be seen as the archetype of the cosmic container, which holds every event and happening, movement, thought, action, etc., all the things that take place within the universe. Notice that the last letter of the word Resh is a shin. This shin can be seen as the movement or action that this cosmic container encloses. This was discussed in the last video regarding the nature of shin. So spelt out, Resh consists of Resh, Yud, Shin. And this can show that the Resh represents the space, represented by the letter Resh, to construct something in existence, or Yod, that generates its own movement, Shin. So I'll say that one more time. Resh represents the space to construct something in existence that generates its own movement. All of these things leave their traces within the cosmos. Nothing is left out nor forgotten. The universe contains this record of every deed, every crime, every ounce of good and every ounce of evil, everything that has been created as well as everything that has been destroyed. Perhaps the most astonishing and mind-bending concept that relates to Resh as being this cosmic container and our relationship to it is that everything is connected and reflected by it, and the contents in which it contains are that which it is given, or that which it receives. As far as coming from us as human beings, using our thoughts, our actions, this cosmic container then compensates based on what it receives. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is all of the traces left behind by us as humans based on our actions, our words, thoughts, movements, are what is received by the universe. Its traces do not leave. This container is then fed this information, and based on what it has received, it shapes itself or gives back to us what it has collected. So in its simplest terms, humans have an intimate part in moving the direction of the universe, the cosmic container. There are amazing correlations between the universe itself and the processes that happen in our minds, hence the meaning of the word Resh as being head. They are an intimate part of one another, in other words. So as we say in Hermeticism, as above, so below, relates a lot to this concept. If you are interested more in this idea, look into the field of quantum physics for further explanation. You can find a lot of stuff there on it. So another way in which to view it is seeing how your own thoughts help shape your world. So if one is constantly negative and pessimistic on the inside, the outer shape of their reality will attract the same kinds of events as well as people. And if one is a positive thinker, on the other hand, with positive affirmations about their life, they will attract more peace and harmony. This is the power of intention of thoughts. Now, humans are connected consciously. There is a collective consciousness that deeply connects us all into a unified field, whether we are aware of it or not. So as a whole, as a humanity, the way in which we manifest our lives is the direction this cosmic Resh will move, and we will all be affected by it somehow. This is why Resh is also associated with the term wickedness, and this is something we will dive into at some point later on. So going back to the number 200, let's take a look at the other two numbers and letters of the Hebrew alphabet that relate to Resh as 200. So the first letter that we'll look at is the letter Bet, which means house, and it is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, 2 being the base number of 200. So the image of a house gives us the idea of acting as a sort of container. We won't go into much detail on this letter at the moment, as we will be discussing it in a future video. Bet, as the second letter of the alphabet, comes after Aleph, the first letter, the letter of the breath or spirit of the divine. So the letter Bet can be seen as the house or container which holds the spirit of the divine, the Aleph. Bet is associated with the tarot card, the Magician, and the Magician can be seen as tying into the concept we had just discussed, as humans being this divine creation whose consciousness is intimately connected to the universe itself. We are the magicians which house the creative spirit, and through us we help to influence the flow of the cosmos in a certain direction. We ourselves are a created image, created after the image of the Creator, which holds the power and free will to create what we want. So the second letter that relates to Resh as well as Bet is the letter Kaf, which means palm, and that is the 20th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And we get 20 by multiplying 2 by 10. So related to the letter Kaf is the concept of filling and emptying, which we use a container for. Think of a measuring cup that one would use having the capacity to hold a given amount of an ingredient, as well as to pour some of it out, or empty the contents in which it holds. As a palm, Kaf symbolizes the ability of the hand to act as a sort of container. Think of all the possibilities we have in front of us through the use of our hands. As a verb, Kaf literally can mean to contain. As the Wheel of Fortune, which is a tarot card associated to Kaf, we can see Kaf, sorry, my alarm just went off. We can see Kaf as a sort of protective container that allows the cycles of the wheel of the elements to take place. So moving on, now that you've seen how these three letters can relate to each other as a form of a container of sorts, although we have already discussed humans as being containers for consciousness somewhat, let's dive into this a bit deeper by looking at the concept of Resh as the head. So there are a few ways in which we can talk about the head, but to start, let's focus on Resh and the head as relating to cognizance and comprehension. So as a container, the head holds the brain, which is the tool in which consciousness mainly acts through. Still to this day, we do not know where consciousness lives within us. However, we know that our brain is the device in which it operates through, for the most part, as consciousness can be found outside of the brain and other parts of the body through practices of deep meditation. Our brains hold our memories, which is a collection of thoughts, ideas, emotions, reactions, past events, and the information we have derived from such events. Our brain is also the center for our self-consciousness and subconsciousness. The self-conscious aspect is that 10% of the brain we normally use, and the subconscious and unconscious make up the other 50 and 40%. If we view the letters as possessing qualities of the letters that came before it in the sequence, then we can say that Resh is the head that also contains Kof, the previous letter, which means back of the head. As the astrological sign of the sun, Resh represents the waking self-conscious of the intellect, while Kof can be seen as the lunar, sleeping unconscious aspect of the mind. The unconscious and subconscious aspects of ourselves can be found at the back of the brain or head, hence the meaning of the letter Kof. This part of the head deals mostly with the limbic system of the brain. Many Kabbalists and Judaic scholars say that the letter Kof is made up of a Resh, as the head of its letter, although its bottom looks slightly bent. In the Zohar, which is an ancient Kabbalistic text, it states that the letters Kof and Resh are letters of falsehood and impurity. And you'll see a little bit more as to what this means as we get deeper into this lecture. But if you were to combine the two letters together, you would get the word Kar, which means cold. So to be cold symbolically represents a state in which we are living contradictory to warmth, which represents a way of living that is full of passion and life and openness to the possibilities of life. It is to live, in a sense. Now remember what I said last lecture relating to the word evil. It is the word live spelt backwards. Therefore, to be living in a cold state represents our lack of connection to the divinity of the world, a lack of connection in seeing others as part of the bigger picture and not just our own self-centered viewpoint of life, in which we will do anything in our power to keep under our control. We then exercise a sort of resistance to the flow of life, which, putting it in a metaphorical term, is the will of the divine that we resist, the events taking place in the cosmic container. This is why the word Ra, which begins with a Resh, spells out the word for evil, bad, or misery. In Hermeticism, we view the universe as being mental, all mind, and the further studies of quantum physics will demonstrate this same principle. So here's where we see the marriage of the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the human through the connection of the mind, the head. We already discussed how our consciousness has a powerful sway in the universe. We also stated how our actions, movements, words, and thoughts all have an effect in the cosmic container. The word Resh hides this connection that humans have to the cosmic container by containing within its spelling the word Yesh, which is spelled Yod Shin, which means existence, being, substance, all the things which make up a conscious human. Going back to the idea of how we affect the cosmic container, let's focus on the function of thought. All these other things, such as our actions and words, begin as a thought. Whether we unconsciously do something on impulse or not, it is an unconscious thought that causes it in the first place. So we can say that our thoughts are the root of our words and actions. Of course, our emotions play a large part in our thoughts, even inspiring our thoughts and creating specific thoughts. But our thoughts also play an important role in steering our emotions. This can be seen by the connection and progression of the four worlds found in the Kabbalah. The world of Bria, the emotions, comes before the world of mental thoughts, Yetzirah, the world of formation. Yet they are intimate neighbors and have a powerful effect in directing one another. Emotion can be seen as energy in motion, and our thoughts can work as conductors in order to steer that emotion into something positive or something negative. The path of Resh is the 30th path of the sun, and astrologically, Resh is assigned to the fiery body of the sun. Notice that this path connects to the Sephirah of Hod, which is the intellect, yet Hod is a Sephirah that is attributed to the element of water, which governs our emotions. So now one may see the intimate connection that the intellect has with the emotions. Resh, as the sun, is an archetype of fire, and this fire is equated with universal water through the letter Mem, which is the mother letter of water. When taking the three letters that compose the letter Mem, which are Mem, Yod, Mem, and spelling them in their fullness or extension, in other words, we get the number 200, the same as Resh, again showing this intimate connection between water and fire. So let's take a moment and reflect on the nature of our thoughts, which are governed by the head, Resh. The letter Resh can also signify the idea of beginnings, and a beginning is a starting place in which one can make a choice. In reference to our thoughts, we can use the intellect to either choose between greatness and evolution, or degeneration and de-evolution. When we spell Resh with a Vav instead of a Yod in the middle, we get the word Rush, which means pour. But when we assert the letter Aleph, the letter of spirit, into the place of the Vav, we get the word Rosh, which means chief, head, top, or summit. The word head can also represent a leader as well as the word chief. Just think of the head of something, the leader of something. So therefore, spirit is the leader in our thoughts, leading to greatness and evolution, as opposed to the poorness in our thoughts, which leads to our degeneration. The Aleph helps the Resh to express the oneness, the eternity of the Creator, and leads to the qualities of being a leader or chief, rather than a follower. With the letter Shin at the end of Resh, we are shown that we have the fire in our heads that enlivens us and gives us the capacity of perception. It is the fiery electricity in the brain, which some call the Christ fire. In many of us, however, this fire is not really awakened. It is in some sort of conscious slumber. One must learn to activate this fire so that it has full consciousness of itself. Take a second and realize that most people will identify themselves with their names, their characteristics, hobbies, talents, etc. The list goes on, whenever they are asked who they are. This is where we can look at Resh as being represented as the sun. In one's astrological chart, their sun sign is the zodiacal sign in which they were born under in a given month. This sun sign helps to describe one's personality. Think of a sun sign as a paradigm or a program one is born with as a sort of operating tool. We may find all of these other similarities with other people who are born in the same sign or program, even though we are all divinely unique in our own way. As humans, however, we can become so engulfed by our personality that it becomes all we recognize. Going back to these traits we use to describe ourselves, these things may help describe our experience and journey in life thus far. It is not who or what we are at the core, however. There really is no answer as to who we are other than I am. I am consciousness. I am awareness, which allows me to have perception and observation of the reality within me as well as outside of me. A good way to slowly introduce one to this Christ fire is to take some time to meditate. And while meditating, notice that there is a pure awareness or consciousness that observes everything without judgment. When something arises in the mind, steer it back to this observer or watcher within. You may even start to realize that by meditating, you are essentially being meditated on. Meaning this observer is watching this idea of the image of self in which you have created and all of its thoughts and ideas. Yet the observer is still an intimate part of you at the same time. This takes a lot of practice and a lot of time to fully sink in, and one will know when they have awakened this perception, for it carries out into their daily lives, even while not meditating. They will be tapping into this awareness naturally, hence waking the fire up. Remember how in the last lecture we talked about what the word Israel hides within it? The sentence, I have the fire of God in my head, and Israel being representative of this higher spiritual consciousness. We may have this sun sign that we are identified with in our outer world, but we fail to see we also have this inner spiritual sun in the head, which makes us a conscious living being. It is in the higher center of consciousness in our heads, the Yechida of the Kabbalists, which corresponds to Keter in our body, the crown of the head. Notice that Keter ends with a Resh. This is a place within us where we may realize our unity with the Creator, and our unity with the cosmic container as well, the macrocosmic Resh. To the yogis of the East, this is the crown chakra, the Sahasrara center, where Creator and creation merge as one. Going back to the idea of our choice in thoughts and choosing which ones to follow, many people are stuck in the poorness of their thoughts. They are stuck in a sort of prison of conflicting wills, a chaotic storm of worries, regrets, fears, desires, and attachments. The word rahab, beginning with resh, gives hint to this, as it means to act stormily, prideful, arrogant, defiant. So we are warned against worshiping false idols. And another way to look at this is that these false idols are really psychological factors. And we call them idols because we worship them, even when they cause us pain. We become so used to them that most of the time we refuse to change our ways of thinking. We are fearful of the change. The word raha, again beginning with resh, is a word which means to fear. So as long as we are dominated by such thoughts, we are living in a state of poorness, spiritually speaking. Due to this poorness in thought, our emotions can fuel them more, and we will have no control over our emotions. These two weapons combined will lead one to negative, self-centered, destructive, or harmful words and actions. This will have a negative impact on the cosmic container itself, influencing it in a certain way, which in turn influences the minds of others. It is true that every choice we make has an impact on the world itself, the butterfly effect. This can be seen as cause and effect, or essentially collective karma. When one chooses to change the course of their thinking toward the direction of goodness and divinity, they slowly begin to align themselves with the cosmic consciousness of the divine itself. When we try to find our rightful place within the whole of the universe, rather than acting as its center in a selfish manner, we may find that our thoughts are not so different from those of the Creator, and we begin to reflect it within our own behavior. As the cosmic container of Resh is a container that receives, then gives, we become the same kind of container. We receive for the sake of giving to others. This is an important Kabbalistic theme called bread of shame, in which one receives for the sake of receiving for oneself only. One must learn to receive for the sake of giving to others. For example, divine knowledge, wisdom, love, compassion. So we spend all this time in our spiritual practices to invoke these qualities and energies. However, what are we really doing with them if we are only committing to such practices just to keep it all to ourselves? Let's take a little detour here and go back to the word Ra, meaning evil. So I already explained one viewpoint that I have involving the concept of evil, and there are many more out there. Anyone who has studied the nature of evil will see that it has a divine purpose within the universe. There are many Kabbalistic sources that will discuss such topics. So the word Ra can represent one identifying with their mind, Resh, and its own acquired possibilities, which is a meaning of the letter Ayin, possibilities. So what I am attempting to describe here is when a person measures reality based on their own experiences. I'm sure we all have known at least one person like this in our lives, where their ideas of reality seem to be supreme over others, and anyone else's ideas or opinions which threaten to shatter all that this person knows as real based off of their own experiences, they become defensive or simply shut the other person's ideas down. It is like a person who has never seen a ghost being told by another that ghosts exist because they themselves have seen one. I can't tell you how many people I have known say ghosts don't exist simply because they have never had the experience of seeing one. So when we practice this kind of evil, this Ra, we begin to practice a form of ignorance, really. We become completely identified with our own psyche, ruled by its own manufactured restrictions, and not able to see outside the limits of our own experiences. This goes back to the idea of the observer within us, the fire in the head. Who experiences behind these eyes of ours? Is it the idea of the created self we have built up and work to protect? Or is it that observer, that pure awareness of the divine? Here's the paradox to this, though. What if someone else's Ra, their own limited experiences that the mind identifies with, actually replaces something that has become outworn and considered good? For instance, there are religious and spiritual practices certain cultures used to do that were around for a very long time, and they were seen as the good or moral way to do something at that time. But as the cosmic container changes along with us, as we evolve into different times, what was once considered good may not serve a purpose any longer and may be in need of some change. In a certain circumstance, one's evil may challenge one's good, so that is something to meditate on. One's good can actually become fixed and outworn, becoming evil in a cosmic container with so many possibilities and directions. So there's this quote in the Bible saying something that relates kind of to what we just talked about with the evil and replacing the good. And these are they by the wayside, where the word is sown. But when they have heard, Satan cometh immediately, and taketh away the word that was sown in their hearts. Many of our limited perceptions based off of our experiences are simply patterns that we can alter if we have the will to do so. This is the beauty of magic, as well as the Sephira of Yesod on the Tree of Life, the Sephira that is considered to be one of the most magically oriented. In the human being, Yesod is the lunar consciousness of the self. This is the blueprint of the personality, which is associated with the id or the ego of a person, which is exactly what we talked about earlier, the patterns, traits, and characteristics which make up the illusion of self. And as I have already stated, this illusion can be altered if one so desires. The 30th path of Resh, the sun, connects Yesod to the Sephira Hod, the intellect. So now you may see the power of the intellect in shifting these program patterns of the personality through the power of thought. However, it also requires emotion to be in line with thought, as Yesod is also connected to Netzach, the Sephira of emotion. The 30th path implies that we use our will in order to shape the world around us by shaping our inner world as well in order to create a harmony between us and the universe. We must remember to focus on the intellectual path of goodness and evolution, however, since there is a danger in Yesod. It is a great force for either good or evil. Notice that Tiferet is the Sephira of the sun, and the 30th path of Resh is the sun as well, showing a connection between the two. Yesod needs guidance from higher principles, which are supplied by the Sephira of Tiferet through Hod. Amongst other Sephirot, Hod and Yesod are directly linked to Tiferet. Through the path of Resh, the higher consciousness of Tiferet flows through Hod and influences the waveforms of the astral vital self in Yesod. The path of Resh is a path that indicates how we can grow spiritually through a conscious effort of directing our thoughts toward a greater good or a spiritual goal. The word nefesh is associated with the Sephira of Yesod, and this word represents the animal soul within us, directly tied to the ego. It is a lower form of the soul and ties directly to our vital energetic body, as well as our instinctive behavior. There is then the word ruach, which begins with the letter resh. The ruach is a complex term and is represented by numerous ideas in the Kabbalah. The ruach can be seen as a higher or middle level of soul, however, and it deals with humans having stronger moral virtues. So by utilizing the path of Resh, we can use the ruach to influence the nefesh. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about in relation to the 30th path as well as Resh is the concept of prana and breath, or conscious breathing. So when we choose to operate on the path of Resh in a poor manner, what does this lead to besides a limited and often negative perception? Many people who have studied the mind-body connection, including mystics of the past and present, will tell you that physical ailments and sickness begin on a mental level before manifesting in a physical manner. We can see this through the progression of the Sephirot. We have Hod, the intellect, then Yesod, the vital body, and finally Malkut, the physical body, where it all manifests. This is why it is so important to learn to manage our heads, our Resh. And this is why every spiritual path will preach the importance of having mental control and will employ the techniques of meditation to benefit its students. The 30th path of the sun, Resh, is called the collecting intelligence, because just like the sun, it collects and focuses all the solar power, which is associated with the Eastern term prana. The sun, at the center of our solar system, collects the energy from the invisible side of existence and distributes this energy in the form of light and heat. Prana is connected to the breath and the life-giving force of the universe. Through the control of the breath, through meditation, one can accumulate more prana, as well as learn to control and distribute it throughout the body. Not only does prana have an effect on our heart rate, digestion, blood pressure, and other functions, but it also has an effect on thoughts, as well as quieting the mind through the use of deep breathing. Remember how I said that Yesod must be steered and influenced? Well, the use of pranayama, which is conscious breathing, slowly establishes a sort of interface or connection between the conscious and subconscious mind, where the contents of Yesod become more easily manipulated. This happens through an area in the brain called the reticular activating system, or RAS. The RAS also works as a trigger to activate other parts of the brain, which lead to deeper forms of awareness and access to other hidden information, known as the superconsciousness, symbolized as Tiferet. The only way in which we can affect the RAS is through the breath, though. No other function of the autonomic nervous system can be controlled consciously by our activity. Just as the sun is the center of our solar system, so too must our awareness, our heads, our Resh remain when practicing the art of pranayama. Just as the collective intelligence of the 30th path gathers the solar energy to distribute, so too does our breath in regards to prana. I will end this lecture with one last thing to meditate upon, the word or, Aleph Vav Resh, which means light, contains a Resh at the end. Remember how I said the sun distributes its energy as light? So the letter Aleph is called king over breath, as well as the breath of the divine. Aleph is also the mother letter of air, which signifies breathing. In a previous video, I mentioned that we can view the letter Vav as representing the human spine, connecting the upper and lower worlds or regions of the body, in this case, the Nefesh and Ruach. We then know that the letter Resh means head, which the spine connects to. Pranayama is done through the spinal system, learning to move the prana up and down, and this breath begins at the lower region in the lower navel area, where Yesod is located, pulling up vital energy or prana. So if we were to look at this word, or, once again, it is literally showing us the process of pranayama breathing in a sense. The Aleph, the breath, pulling the prana up the Vav, the spine, into the Resh, the head, and creating or, light in the body. It is also interesting to note that along with Nefesh and Ruach, there is a higher level of the soul called Neshama, and all three of these words can be used to represent the same meaning, and that meaning is breath. This shows that there is a deep connection in moving into and connecting the deeper aspects of one's soul through the process of breathing consciously. Ask a mystic how to find the divine, and many will tell you the same answer, through the breath. Thank you all for taking the time to watch this video, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas about the letter Resh. Hopefully you'll look a little bit deeper into this letter and find some more interesting facts on it. I will be back in the next week or so with the next letter, Kof. Thank you all for watching.